Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Community Cafe. We are live on Zoom.com as well as we are live on Facebook Live. Our trio of hosts, we have Chris Toman with First Option Bank, Glenn Stockton with Stockton & Stern Law Firm, and myself, Mark Roberts, owner of Affinity Asset Management. Chris and Glenn have this week off, so today I'm going to be flying solo, interviewing and talking to Tom Strandell from our office. Today's topic is your money in the year of 2020 with coronavirus, COVID-19, politics, and stimulus. So do me a favor, for those of you who are following us here today, do me a favor, click that little share button on your Facebook if you're following on Facebook, and share us with your loved ones in your life. And when you get an opportunity later, go out to our Facebook page on Community Cafe and click to follow us there so you can get our updates on this. Today I got Tom Strandell. Tom Strandell's been in the industry here with me for over 20 years, longtime friend. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Let's start off with the first one here. Let's start talking about the stimulus package. We've so far we put out kind of like a part one, part two of the first stimulus package, about $2.8 trillion. Considering the last time we put out a stimulus package in 2008, that was $800 billion. So now we're at $2.8 trillion. Basically $2 trillion more, with the third round of the stimulus coming out any day with some kind of announcement coming out. So I want to start off with kind of a very loaded question for you. Is the stimulus a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I'll give you a really good opening to that answer. Since politics is one of the subjects of our conversation, I'll sound like a politician. I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes because there's people that are hurting out there, and there's a lot of people that have lost their job. Our economy, obviously has been turned sideways. So this is a way to get to get money in people's hands right away, as well as small businesses. Now, the other side, as far as is it helpful, and it's really kind of a short-term, long-term thing, meaning long-term, how much do we keep stimulating the economy? Because eventually, as we grow that deficit, we've got to pay it back. So there's a ripple effect, not only in the business world, but also in the personal world relative to high taxes and that kind of thing. And one thing is, looking at debt in the trillions. Right now, we're slated to finish 2020 with potentially over $4 trillion issued in debt this year compared to about, I think 1.27 last year. So. Yeah, so it's definitely different times that we're in, Mark.
All right, Tom. So my next question I want to run past you is, with this coronavirus, how has this affected the economy? And when I ask that question, I'm trying to what's the simple answer that most people can try to understand? How has the coronavirus affected the overall economy?
Right. It's had a big effect, and obviously some sectors of the market have done very well. And again, I'm talking on a global scale with technology and really how we're doing business. But if you look at it on a personal level, again, like I said before, a lot of people have lost their jobs, especially in the service industry, the restaurant industry, and a lot of those industries where we're doing a lot of face-to-face interaction. We've seen those, a lot of businesses actually shut down or actually slow down. So the common sense thing is true in the respect that with less people working, there are less people spending money. Matter of fact, I've got if I could be technologically savvy here. Can you see that, Mark?
Yes, it just got pulled up. Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into tons and tons of data on this, but our economy is driven by GDP and spending. So if you look right here, that didn't quite work. I'm going to highlight that, but right here, 67%, or just round it up, really 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. So again, with the fact that people are not spending money because they're laid off, that has an effect on the economy. Now, the other side of the fence is that people that are working and that are in a position to continue to earn a paycheck, their spending habits have altered in the respect that they are saving more money. Great stat came out, and they ran some data on what's called the personal savings rate. And right now it's 33%. And that is the highest it's been in probably over between 40 to 50 years. So people are saving more money. And so that's a good thing because that helps them buffer and weather the storm economically, especially for any future events that may happen. But again, harken back to that slide I just showed, that means they're not spending money, they're saving more money. So it helps one area of the economy, but it hurts one area of the economy as well. So that's, I would say, the long answer is there's a ripple effect, with obviously savings, spending, and really the consumers driving the economy more.
So basically with the average consumer saving so much more money, it benefits them personally, but it hurts the overall economy because America depends on them saving less and spending more. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
And I know that sounds antithetical, but it actually does hurt the economy from a consumer, perspective, really kind of a personal stimulus effect on the economy. But again, it helps the individual long run, like I say, weather the storm, have liquidity available for themselves, should something happen in the economy or personally, whether they get laid off or have an injury or an illness, God forbid.
Okay. So on that same note, because of the stimulus, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit on taxes because we know taxes will eventually have to pay for the stimulus. Tax brackets right now are relatively like at all-time historic lows. They're just super low compared to what they used to be in the past. And where do you see opportunities for investors to take advantage of things right now with a low tax rate versus maybe down the road where taxes might be potentially higher?
A couple areas specifically, and these are things that I work with quite a bit when I talk with people. I'm going to pop another thing on the screen here. That's actually not the one that I want. Let's see here. So one is in particular is in the area of Roth IRAs. And just real quick, Roth IRAs, they are IRAs that you could put money in, you don't get a tax break. But once you have the money in there, it's essentially tax proof, meaning it's going to grow tax deferred. You can withdraw it tax free. You can pass it to a spouse tax free, pass it down to kids and or beneficiaries tax free. So that's a good thing. So one area is number one, adding money to a Roth IRA. Since savings rates are increasing, people that have the ability and that are continuing to work right now, they can add $7,000 per year or $14,000 as a couple. So if you've got extra savings and are not funding a Roth IRA, I'll give you the cliche. It's a no-brainer. Go ahead and take advantage of that. The other thing is what's called a Roth conversion. Roth conversion says I can take money from an IRA, a traditional IRA, and I can move it over to a Roth IRA. But when you do a Roth conversion, you do pay tax on every dollar you convert. Now, what I do like about Roth conversions is that there's a lot of flexibility. I mean, you can convert a little bit, you can convert a lot. It's really up to you, and then you can spread that out over any number of years. Okay, so tying that back to what's going on right now, the markets have been down, the economy is down, and so doing Roth conversions, number one, getting that money over to the Roth where it can grow, and as we have growth in that, obviously it's going to grow in a tax-free environment. And the other side of that is, like you said before, we're in very historic lows as far as tax rates. So we have very low marginal tax rates. We also have very low capital gains rates, which leads me to my last comment, and I'm going to touch on this income in just a second, is also with non-IRA holdings. This may be a good time maybe to harvest some capital gains or balance that off with capital losses because we are at a very historic low as far as capital gains. And this slide I have up here, I like this, and I call it the $5,000 example. And really it looks at two different scenarios. One scenario says, okay, I'm going to draw $5,000, and let's say that's from an IRA. And all that means is that every dollar you take out is going to be taxed. And let's say you need $60,000 a year to live on, or $5,000 a month, right? So if you're in the 25% tax bracket, so if you have to pay 25% in taxes, what that means is you have to take out $80,000 to keep 60. In other words, there's $20,000 taken out for tax. Okay. Now, in the other example, let's say you had a good tax strategy in place. Maybe you did some Roth conversions. You maxed out your Roth IRA, and you're going, hey, in the future when I retire, I've got the ability to choose and control where my taxes come out of. And that $5,000 example says, you know what, I'm going to take $3,000 out of my taxable IRA, but I'm going to take $2,000 out of my tax-free Roth. Now, of course, the $3,000, that $36,000 a year, you still have to draw $48,000, so you're still paying $12,000 in taxes. But over here, again, no taxes. So I'm highlighting that. So what ends up happening is that you have $72,000 a year of total income, but only $48,000 of that is taxable to you. So it's just kind of that painting that vision of going, where's my income going to come from when I'm in retirement? And taxes and tax diversification play really a huge effect on that, Mark. So
Tom, that was a great way to show that. As you know, we've had tons of clients earlier this year do Roth conversions, where we normally recommend Roth conversions every year anyways, but we recommend it at the end of the year. But with the market being down so much earlier with coronavirus, let's take advantage of a big market drop, move that money over. You can move more shares over into a Roth IRA at a much lower point in the market, take advantage of it. So not only are we capitalizing on the market dropping, but we also capitalized on the fact that this is a low tax year, and that likely we're going to have higher taxes down the road. So that was kind of like my leading question to you is, what do you expect will happen with our future tax rates?
Well, obviously we can't predict the future, but we can give it an honest effort. So I'll give you one man's opinion. I think future taxes are going to be higher. And again, there's many different kinds of taxes. You know, obviously we have real estate taxes, property taxes, sales taxes. Those are always incrementally and can go up. And some of those are by direct election from a community. But I think the big ones that you look at relative to retirement planning and financial planning, obviously are what are called the marginal tax rates and also capital gains rates. So I think taxes are going to go up for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are in a very historic low as far as marginal tax rates, okay? And secondly, we are at a historic low for capital gains taxes. And a lot of you may not know this, but there's actually a 0% capital gains tax. So if you look at the tax brackets for capital gains, $0 to $40,000 of income, there's a 0% tax. And then it goes up to 15% all the way up to $441,000. Above 441,000, it's 20%. So what I think is that we're going to see increases in marginal tax rates. I also see we're going to have increases in capital gains tax. And that kind of ties back to the conversation before going, what advantages do you take of now? Number one, with a lower market, but number two, in a low tax environment.
Okay. So probably the easiest question I want to ask you here today is, where does the government come up with the money to pay for the stimulus that they're putting out?
Well, the cliched answer is, hey, the government's just printing more money. But in reality, what the government does is when they say we're going to have stimulus, $1 trillion or $2 trillion, whatever that number is, what they do is they issue bonds. And so they're issuing government bonds that they put on the open market that are purchased by institutions, individuals. They're purchased in mutual funds, exchange traded funds, and those kind of things. And that way the government's getting money for that. But also they owe interest on those bonds at a future date. And really just kind of financial 101, when you think of a bond is a debt instrument. So if a company or corporation issues bonds, basically they owe interest to the people that buy those bonds, and the government is no different. So that's a kind of a way to think about that. So so stimulus money comes from issuing bonds, and right now we're on track. We as a federal government are on track to have between 4 to 4.5 trillion in debt issued this year, compared to about 1.27 trillion last year. So we have a huge effect from what's happened with coronavirus and the economy relative to debt and the deficits.
So this year alone in 2020, we're looking at anywhere between 3 to possibly 4 times the increase in our deficit from last year to this year. Is that the right way to say that?
That is correct. That is
all right.
correct.
So a lot of people went out and voted yesterday, Tom, and did some of those early voting. And this is an election year. Election's always the first week of every other November. It's every 2 years.
Mhm.
Can you explain to everybody watching here today, Tom, who is up for re-election every 2 years? We have it broken down basically by president, by the Senate, and House of Representatives. So could you speak on those three?
Yeah, well, the first one, obviously, the president is every 4 years, and unless you're living in a cave, there's a presidential election this year. So that's my dry humor for the day. But for the U.S. Senate, that's a 6-year term, and so what happens is every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate goes up for re-election. Okay, and then with the House is a 4-year term, and so 50% of the House comes up for re-election every 2 years. So you've got a constant rotation of election year, the presidential election year, where you've got House and Senate. So obviously those are very pivotal years where you can, say there's the term about flipping the House, meaning is it going to go from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican when they talk flipping the House. So that's how the cycle works on, like I say, the election cycle more.
Now, isn't it also accurate to say that when it comes to these elections, that a president at max can serve 2 terms?
Correct.
A senator or a House of Representative has an unlimited number of terms. They can keep getting reelected, and they can be in there for many, many, many years until they get knocked off by somebody else. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of politicians that are in there for a long, long time. And there's always the debate that comes up going, okay, should there be term limits and give new blood and new ideas in there? And and obviously the people that decide term limits are the people that are subject to term limits. So will that ever change? I don't know. But yes, it's an indefinite thing. Obviously with the presidential election, it's 2 terms, which I think that's a good blend. 2 terms is enough, I think, for any president.
All right. So because of the election, and there's been lots of talk in the news whether Biden's going to win, Trump's going to win, whether the Democrats will take control of the Senate, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything that you can show us or talk to us about regarding performance history of the stock market relative to Congress, not specifically the president, but when you have an all Republican Congress, meaning Republicans dominate the Senate and the House of Representatives, compared to a Democratic Congress where the Democrats control the House and the Senate, versus a balanced Congress, which that's what we have right now, is a balanced Congress.
Right.
You got the Republicans controlling the Senate, but you got the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives. Do you have anything that you can talk about regarding performance from the stock market's perspective relative to politics here?
I do. Let me get that up here and share that with you. Here we go. So what's relevant on here, and again, there's a lot of sometimes perception and misperception in terms of who's in charge and what happens. So interestingly, in a Republican-controlled majority, the average annual return of the market has been 11.8%, and then with a Democratic-controlled majority, it's been 9.2%. So you've got about a 2.6% spread between those. In a divided government, you have right here, it says 6%. And I'll blow that up a little bit. Might be kind of hard to read that. So hopefully people that are logging on can see that. Now
something I find interesting on this, Tom, is it's not just the average rate of return being on here. I think it's the number next to it. It clearly shows that the Republicans have, when the Republicans control Congress, we have a higher average rate of return versus Democrat versus balanced. However, a Republican-dominated Congress has only happened 11% of the time.
Correct.
62% of the time is where we have some kind of a divided Congress. So 62% of the time it's been divided, and then that's when we have a much lower average rate of return. And Tom, I've always kind of felt the easiest way to say about having a balanced or a divided Congress is the reason why the rate of return is lower is just because it's, political fighting from one side to the other, and it takes longer for the two sides, Republicans and Democrats, between House and Senate, to finally get to agree on things. Everything takes longer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would definitely agree with that. And there's the old term about bipartisanship, but ultimately, you've got differences between both parties, philosophically and definitely fiscally. And also remember, Mark, if you're, especially a congressman or a congresswoman, you also have your own constituency. So you've got this balanced allegiance between your party and Congress and the United States, but also your own constituency in the respect that you want to get reelected, but also you want to serve your people well. So it's obvious that the divided government has a lower rate of return because of the lack of bipartisanship when it comes to negotiating, especially fiscal and tax policy.
Good. Thank you for showing that. Sticking with the president here, Tom, I'm going to go on to my next question.
Okay.
You and I, we both listen to a lot of information, read, listen, be a part of information that comes directly from analysts and economists from major companies all over the United States, major investment companies. So do you think you can kind of summarize what other analysts and economists are saying related to if President Trump wins, what do you think that means for the stock market and taxes versus if Biden wins, what does that typically mean for the stock market and taxes?
Okay. Yeah, and I would say I'll start with Trump first. There's kind of a common thought that, gee, Trump is very business friendly and is anti-tax, but also it's his last, it's his last term in office if he gets reelected. I think you may see an increase of taxes in some areas, and I think those taxes may be on the higher income earners, and that Trump wants to be very sensitive to the lower and the middle income earners in terms of classes. And I know when the Tax Reform Act, where they really eliminate a lot of the deductions, but they said, hey, we're going to double the standard deduction. That actually helped a lot of people. I know a lot of people that I've talked to actually had a tax decrease in that. The other area with Trump, and Trump and maybe Biden both, is a lot of people aren't aware that that you contribute to Social Security up to a certain point of income. So once you earn $137,700, every dollar you earn above that, you do not have to contribute to Social Security. So I also think that you will see that cap being raised, and that's another form of taxation on the higher income earners as well. Now, flip it over to Biden. Again, Biden and the Democrats, they've made it very abundant that we want to raise taxes on the wealthy. So I think you'll see the top marginal rates increase, the brackets, but I also think you're going to see capital gains rates increase as well. Now, I mentioned before the top capital gains rate right now is $441,000, and there is talk in the platform that they're going to raise that 20% up to 39 or 40%. Okay, and again, now that the stock market's not going to like it, because the stock market is very much driven on obviously trading, an influx of money, and corporate profitability. So that's going to help it there. One other thing that isn't talked about a lot is with small businesses, and small businesses really are a majority employer in this country. And I would say small businesses would be businesses that employ less than 500 people. And so one of the things they look at on taxing is the estate tax and transitioning wealth from one generation to another. And so small businesses use what's called a family valuation discount. So if you have a small business with 6 kids and 4 kids are involved and 2 are not, there's a way to do discounting shares into that family for generational wealth transfer. So I don't want to go too deep into that, but those are things I think that Biden and the Democratic side also are going to take a look at and hurt small business that way. So both sides of the fence have some good ideas. Both sides of the fence have some ideas that are not the best. Obviously it's not a perfect world we live in. But also that's the nice thing about our system, if I can make an overarching patriotic comment, is that we have disagreements, but also we're not monolithic in that we're just tied into one ideology, and that we have the ability to debate ideas and have that forum. So that's my patriotic comment for the day, Mark.
One of the things that I have a lot of clients asking me is, what's the stock market going to do if Trump gets elected? What's the stock market going to do if Biden gets elected? I always like to say election times bring volatility because elections bring the possibility of change. Good change, bad change, change is change. The stock market doesn't like change. So elections create change, elections create uncertainty, and therefore that creates the volatility. So yeah, I think it's somewhat easy to say whether you're, let's say, a Trump fan or not. The stock market's probably going to do better if Trump gets elected because, like him or not, it's not change. And with Biden, if he gets elected, like him or not, that is change. And he could be the absolute best person in the world to elect, but it's change, and it's a lot of change. And so the stock market typically reacts with a lot of volatility there when it comes to elections. So Tom, let's get down to the last couple of questions we'll finish with today. From the very beginning of this whole coronavirus outlook and what's been going on, there's been enormous amounts of talk behind the scenes, let's call it not on the news, but behind the scenes that you and I get from analysts and economists talking about, you stretch this out and you look at this over the next 1-2 years and kind of you go back and look at the time where we went through, this is going to look like a multiple W, up, down, up, down, up, down. But so far, we've only had a V. It's gone down, it's gone up, and that's it. So I want to ask, could you just explain to folks what's the difference between a V versus a W-shaped market environment?
Okay, yeah, and obviously those are letters we look at. So a V is that the market goes down and the market goes back up. So we've had a sharp retracement from the bottoms, and the market has recovered very, very strongly. But now there's storm clouds on the horizon and worry that number one, PE ratios, which are called price to earnings ratios, but it's a way that companies are valued in relative to their earnings and their profit. Right now we have PE ratios that are at all-time highs and very similar to the PE ratios that we had in the tech bubble, which is the early 2000s. So there's a lot of worry that the market is oversold and overbought. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other comment you made is yes, the market does not like uncertainty. So obviously we've got some volatility and turmoil with the presidential election coming up and who's going to get elected and what those policies will be. And then a big part of that that's been driving the market is the technology industry. You hear the term FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Tech stocks have been a big component in that growth. Now, the W, and I love the comment you make because 2 years from now, we can look back, and it's always easy to look back, okay? And if you look at the time we're in right now, and again, to me, it feels like we've been in this coronavirus era for a long time, but really it's only been since, February, January, February when this started. And so we're still relatively, short time into that. So W is going to say, hey, we've got this V, we have another downturn, and then we have another upturn. So instead of a V, you've got a W in terms of that recovery. And obviously we can't predict when that's going to happen, but I believe, like I say, 2 years from now, when we look backwards, Mark, that we're going to see definitely V-shaped patterns in the volatility because of the different factors that we've talked about. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, so to wrap this up, Tom, on this V and W, one of the things that I know you and I both talk to clients about is with the stimulus money has basically prevented a W-shaped environment so far, and it's only allowed it to look like a V. Mm-hmm. But with the Federal Reserve dropping interest rates all the way down to zero in one fell swoop, when they usually drop interest rates a quarter of a point at a time, so they emptied out their bullets pretty quickly on that. Mm-hmm. And now the government steps in and does stimulus, which does help. And as Pat in our office says, it kind of puts sweetener on it and kind of makes things look better than what it really is by doing the stimulus. So stimulus is helping us today, but it's kind of hurting us really for tomorrow. That this V shape to W shape, we're going to have another round of stimulus. And Trump's already announced that it's going to happen. He just hasn't announced when and how much and who all is going to be who's going to benefit from it. So when it finally comes out, I think you and I both can agree that the next stimulus is going to continue to fuel the market for a while longer, probably up to the point of the election. But once we get past the election and we no longer can lower interest rates and we no longer are going to be putting out stimulus packages, that's when things will start to go from a V-shaped environment to a W-shaped environment. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's definitely going to be a stimulus. And right now there's debate between Republicans and Democrats in terms of what that looks like. And one of the overarching themes is On the Democratic side, let's continue the $600 a week up until January of 2021. And again, like I said before, that's one of those things where it gets hands immediately it gets money in the hands of people immediately that need it. The downside to that is that there are people where they're getting, the unemployment and the additional 600, and they actually make more than what it is to go back to work. So there's a lot of small business owners going, we're open for business and we need employees. So it's this weird kind of dichotomy between working and stimulating and not working retrospectively. The Republican side, they want to do more of a modified stimulus in terms of the unemployment, and they're targeting right now about $200 a month, and they're going to do that through September, and then they're going to scale that back to 70% of what wages are. And then the other part is the one-time stimulus check, which was either $1,200 or $2,400. And I think both plans are pretty much in agreement on that. One huge area of agreement, or actually disagreement, is the Democratic side of the fence wants to put a lot of money towards the cities and states, $1 trillion in funding towards the states and cities, $3.6 billion towards elections. The Republican side is saying, hey, you know what? They think they're throwing money down that's more wasteful in that respect, and that they want to have it targeted really more towards individuals and businesses and not propping up individual states and economies. So they've got to work those differences out, and I think they will. So it's going to be some form and fashion of what I just described right there, Mark.
Well, Tom, that was outstanding. I want to say thank you so much for joining us here today on Community Cafe. Thank you to everybody who is watching live and people who are going to be watching later as it shows up later in your news feeds, as well as for people who's also watching it live right now on zoom.com. Next week, we're going to work on that topic and get that out, and we'll put that out on Facebook as what next week's topic is going to be on. We shoot the Community Cafe live every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Central Time. And of course, if you have it on your news feed of Facebook, it'll show up later whenever you get to your Facebook. So thank you again one more time to Tom Strandell with Infinity Asset Management for joining us. I want to wish everybody health and safety. Thanks for watching here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mark. Have a great day, everybody.